Welcome to a spiritual offering from Trinity Episcopal Church in Boonville, with the sermon of Mother Linda Logan for the last Sunday after Epiphany. My faith looks up to thee,
Thou Lamb of Calvary, Savior divine. Now hear me while I pray. Take all my guilt away. Oh, let me from this day be wholly thine. May thy rich grace impart strength to my fainting heart, my zeal inspire, as thou hast died for me. Oh, may my love to thee, pure, warm, and chaste, must be a living fire. While life's dark maze I tread, and griefs around me spread, be thou my guide. Bid darkness turn to day, life's sorrows, tears away. Lord, let me ever stray from thee aside. When life's transient dream, when death's cold sullen stream shall o'er me roll, blessed Savior, then in love, fear and distrust remove. Oh, bear me safe above a ransomed soul. My faith looks up to thee.
In the name of the one holy God, Creator, Redeemer, Sustainer. Amen. His face shining like the sun, Jesus stands on the mountain, talking with Moses and Elijah until he's caught up in the cloud. Transfiguration. That's what the church calls this event, which is described for us not just in Matthew, but also in Mark and Luke. Each gospel provides us with this scene, each somewhat differently. But what is common to them all, besides the core of the event itself, is the setting. What immediately precedes this event in the telling of the gospel, and what follows it. what comes right before this scene in each of the three Gospels is Jesus telling his disciples that he must undergo great suffering, and that they must too, if they are to be his followers. And what follows the scene is the encounter with the father of the epileptic child, whom the disciples could not cure. Now, you may be thinking, so, evidently these things happened in that order. Well, maybe they did, and maybe they didn't. Each of the gospel writers worked from written and oral sources and shaped their telling of the story of Jesus in different ways to underscore different understandings the early church communities had about Jesus. Remember, it's the church telling the story of Jesus in each of the Gospels. It's the people whose hearts and minds have come to new life because of Jesus who are telling what the community remembers about him and what they have come to understand through reflection and their own experience as a community. So the fact that all three of these Gospels have the same setting for the account of the Transfiguration means at least two things. It means that each of these Gospel writers is using the same source material here. It also means that each of the communities that produced one of the Gospels found the setting of this event to be important. So let's look at the setting a little more closely. Going back a little further before the Transfiguration, in each of these Gospels, Jesus asks the disciples, "Who do the people say that I am?" And the disciples tell him, "John the Baptist, or Elijah, or one of the other prophets." And Jesus redirects the question, "But who do you say that I am?" And in each case, Peter blurts out, as if it had just dawned on him, "The Messiah." This is obviously the correct answer, for Jesus sternly orders the disciples not to tell anyone that this is who he is. And what follows next tells us why. Jesus begins to tell his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. This is not the activity that any of them have ever associated with the Messiah. The leader Israel thought would lead them into freedom and back into domination of their own land. So Jesus provides them with the meaning they need to attach to the title of Messiah. The Messiah is the one anointed by God to lead Israel, but he will lead by following the lead of God, and that lead is into the heart of suffering. And if any want to become my followers, Jesus says, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. Now, this is the material that immediately precedes the account of the Transfiguration. And what follows the experience on the mountain is the encounter with the father of the epileptic child. The distraught father falls at Jesus' feet, or speaks or shouts at him from the crowd, depending upon the gospel, and says that Jesus' disciples could not cure his son. And Jesus says, with slight variations from gospel to gospel, "You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you? How much longer must I put up with you? Bring him here to me." And Jesus rebukes the demon, and it comes out of him, and the boy is cured instantly. Then the disciples come to Jesus privately and say, "Why could we not cast it out?" And he says to them, "Because of your little faith." Faith is what is being pointed at in this episode that follows the Transfiguration. Faith in the power of God. Faith is what is being pointed at in the episode that leads up to the Transfiguration. Faith that God's ways, which lead us into suffering and crucifixion, are the ways that lead to life. And it is these two episodes which underscore the necessity of faith that bracket the account of the Transfiguration. Jesus is transfigured before his disciples in a scene that is as loaded with meaning as any in the Scriptures. Led up a high mountain, transfigured until his face shone, Jesus enters into the cloud, which represents God's presence, there to be identified to those who listen in awe as the beloved of God, the one to whom God directs the people to listen. For anyone acquainted with the Hebrew Scriptures, as Matthew's first hearers certainly were, this event spoke not only of the transfiguration of Jesus, but of the transfiguration required of Jesus' followers. For this is the new Moses being identified, the new leader and lawgiver, the climbing up the high mountain, the transfiguration of the face, the entering into the cloud, which throughout the Scriptures has identified God's presence. All of these things signaled Moses' special relationship with God. And witnessing these things now in relation to Jesus, the disciples are to understand that it is Jesus they are to follow. And it is Jesus' understanding that is to give direction to their way. Moses and Elijah are present as if to bless this redirection. For Moses represented the law, and Elijah the prophecy of Israel. So it is faith that is being pointed to here as well. faith that in Jesus the law and the prophets of Israel meet and go forward in a new articulation. But there is one more thing to note. Matthew's telling of the Transfiguration is the only one that includes Jesus coming to the disciples and saying to them, "Get up and do not be afraid." The disciples are cowering in fear at what they have just witnessed. And Jesus comes to them and, touching them, says these words. Why do the other Gospels not include this? Did Matthew make it up? Did Matthew, who was forever mining the Hebrew Scriptures for images and phrases that would speak to him of Jesus, think of Daniel here? Daniel, who at the end of a vision fell prostrate in terror at the approach of the angel Gabriel? That vision also was of God's intervening in the course of human events, of God's indication that the course of things was going to change. And Matthew, following Mark, has already described Jesus' clothes as having a dazzling whiteness, a description also applied to the clothing of the Ancient One in another of Daniel's visions. These allusions would speak to Matthew's Jewish audience. They might well be cowering themselves, for the context in which they lived was that of the social and religious instability that followed the destruction of the temple in 70 CE. These early followers of Jesus would need to hear him say, "Get up and do not be afraid." So this is the directive they were given. And it is the one we are given as well. Institutions we have always counted on are crumbling. People of our nation are looking at each other with disdain and fear. Mass shootings continue to murder persons in state after state. We have no idea where things are going. But the vision of Jesus is with us, and that vision is of transfiguration. So we get up and go forward, and we go without fear.
I danced in the morning when the world was begun, and I danced in the moon and the stars and the sun, and I came down from heaven and I danced on the earth. At Bethlehem I had my birth. Dance then wherever you may be, I am the Lord of the dance, said he, and I'll lead you all wherever you may be, and I'll lead you all in the dance, said he. I danced for the scribe and the Pharisee, but they would not dance and they wouldn't follow me. I danced for the fishermen, for James and John, they came with me and the dance went on. Dance then wherever you may be, I am the Lord of the dance, said he, and I'll lead you all wherever you may be, and I'll lead you all in the dance, said he. and I cured the lame. The holy people said it was a shame. They whipped and they stripped and they hung me high and left me there on a cross to die.
I danced on a Friday when the sky turned black. It's hard to dance with the devil on your back. They buried my body and they thought I'd gone. But I am the dance and I still go on.
Dance then wherever you may be. I am the Lord of the dance, said he, and I'll lead you on wherever you may be, and I'll lead you on in the dance, said he. They cut me down and I leapt up high. I am the life that'll never, never die. I'll live in you if you live in me. I am the Lord of the dance, said he. Dance then wherever you may be. I am the Lord of the dance, said he, and I'll lead you all wherever you may be.
And I'll lead you all wherever you may be.
And I'll lead you all in the dance, said he. I'll lead you all in the dance, said he.
This has been a spiritual offering from Trinity Episcopal Church in Boonville. We're glad you could join us this morning and hope you can again next week.